Welcome back to episode 2 of where I put a quad running gear, or engine as you could say, in this kids toy electric ride-along Ranger. If you haven't seen episode 1, I'll put a link in the description. You can jump over there, see what it's all about before we get into this episode. But anyway, moving along, I'm going to work on the frame that's on the underside of this, because where it stands at this point, I don't have any way of setting the height that this sits on the quad running gear or anything like that. There's no mounting points, there's nothing. It's really flimsy. I have to make a metal frame out of 25 by 25 box tubing I've chosen to use. It's just because of what I've got in the shed at the moment. I'm going to get that. I'm going to run it all the way inside this plastic shell here. So I'll flip it over and show you what I mean. This is what I was talking about, how flimsy it is. On here, I'm going to run this box tubing around all the sort of edging all the way around, down underneath there so you can't see it through the wheel arch. Underneath the bumper just there, back around, all the way around, basically make a skeleton. After I've done that, what that'll allow me to do is set the height, sit it on top of the chassis of the quad. I'll then be able to weld it into position, and at that point, I'll be able to then mount everything else that needs to be put in there, like the fuel tank, the oil mixture tank, and anything else that sort of was taken off the original quad frame. So let's get into it. now that I've got the Ranger frame done that sits up underneath the plastic shell that's just over there, I'm now faced with the task of where do I put the fuel tank and the oil tank that mixes with the fuel automatically. On this, I did have rails coming up to here as support, but they were in the way of where I wanted to put the fuel tank. So what I've done now is I've cut those off and just run some supports down to the bottom of the chassis of the quad frame, which looks like I'll be able to fit that fuel tank nice and low in the front there, which will sit underneath the bonnet, and also in that same space that's in the front, just to the right of the fuel tank, I'll be able to put the oil tank just next to it, which is still higher than the engine, so gravity feed will still flow the oil into the engine. So yeah, let's get into it. Tackle on this Ranger is the steering. Just here you can see that the steering column interferes with this, and the direction that travels up isn't sort of where it needs to be when the dash is just here. It sort of needs to change angle and point more this way and have the steering wheel sort of here. You can see this one here is pretty useless. It's plastic. It's not really going to connect on there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump on eBay. I'm going to buy a go-kart steering system with a proper steering wheel with an intermediate shaft with universal joint, so I can change direction just once. So come down from the steering wheel, change direction, and then enter down the bottom just down there, and then be able to steer the vehicle down the bottom. So yeah, I'm just going to jump on eBay and go and see what I can find.
Three days later.
These are the things that I've ordered on eBay. This is mainly what I was after. I was after the steering wheel because it's bigger, it's got a better mounting point. I'm not going to use the steering rack, tie rod ends or anything like that. They just come as part of the kit. I couldn't buy it separately. I had to buy this, which is the weld-in mounting point. Houses the bearings on either end. It's got some circlips, connects to the back side of the steering wheel, and then once that's all assembled just there, I'll mount some brackets that come down to the chassis of the quad frame, and then I'll be able to mount the steering. And from that point, I'll be able to connect the intermediate shaft and get that angle change that I was talking about earlier. So basically, come back from the steering wheel, change angle, come down, and connect to what the original steering shaft was on the quad frame. So that there, none of those bits really I'm going to use. So mainly just this section of stuff there. So let's get into it. after a lot of hours spent, I finally got the frame done, and I've also spent a lot more hours doing the intermediate shaft and the steering connection. Obviously it's all just roughed in at the moment, none of it's neat, super ugly, but rather than fully weld everything and find that you've got to cut the pieces again because it didn't work, it's best to just tack weld everything. It's not as strong as it could be, but it'll get there. We've now got steering, so the intermediate shaft, angle change and bearing is doing its job. So we're getting close to being able to use it. Got the fuel tank and the oil tank mounted. Got to make some more brackets to make those a little bit more firm, because when the fuel's in there it's going to be a lot heavier and want to walk around. So that'll be coming up. So the next thing probably is to get the wiring back on there, figure out how I'm going to have the exhaust exit the rear so it's like nice and hidden, because when I'm driving on the streets or at a park or something like that, I don't really want people really knowing what it is. I want people to look around and go, what the hell is that sound, but not really notice where it's coming from. So stick around for what's coming up next.